If Aston Martin pulls into the pit lane before the Australian Grand Prix even starts, it will be one of the most shocking non-starts in modern Formula One history. And this isn't speculation. Days before Melbourne, reports revealed Honda arrived with critically low spare parts after structural vibration failures damaged key battery components in testing. We're talking about a brand new power unit. A project worth hundreds of millions. Adrian Newey overseeing the technical direction. Fernando Alonso ready to launch a new era. And yet, there is a real possibility the car never takes the start. Not because it's slow. Because it might not survive. Severe vibration resonance. Battery damage serious enough to stop the car for safety. Limited replacement components before race 1. Start the race and risk destroying the season's allocation. Or retire on the formation lap, and protect the future. We are just days away from the first Grand Prix of the year. Global spotlight. Maximum pressure. Zero margin for error. And one quiet lap around Albert Park could decide whether Aston Martin begins the season with ambition or controlled retreat. Stay with me, because one overlooked technical detail about Honda's engine crisis changes everything. Now let's break down why this situation is far more serious than just low spare parts. Because spare parts don't disappear for no reason. They disappear when something fundamental goes wrong. During testing, Honda's new power unit began producing abnormal vibration patterns. Not small fluctuations. Structural resonance between the V6 engine and the chassis itself. When vibration frequencies align with the natural frequency of the car's structure, energy multiplies instead of fading away. It builds. It travels. It stresses components that were never meant to absorb that level of oscillation. And in this case, that stress hit the worst possible area. The battery. This battery is not a removable add-on. It is integrated into the monocoque. It is part of the survival cell. When the chassis vibrates, the battery feels it directly. In Bahrain, that interaction caused internal damage serious enough to stop the car for safety. Not performance. Safety. That distinction matters. Because once safety is involved, every decision becomes conservative. Now connect that to the spare parts crisis. Testing mileage was significantly lower than rivals. While other teams were running long simulations, Aston Martin was limiting exposure. On the final day in Bahrain, they completed only a handful of laps because they did not have safe power unit components left to risk. That means stock was already under pressure before the season even began. Think about that. Race 1 has not started, and the allocation strategy is already fragile. In modern Formula 1, you do not have unlimited engines. You do not have unlimited battery packs. Every failure early in the year compresses your margin later. Grid penalties become real. Development schedules shift. So Australia is no longer just a season opener. It is a risk calculation. Honda rushed countermeasures. Reinforced mounting points. Adjusted engine maps. Changes to how vibration transfers through the structure. Conservative electrical deployment to reduce stress. But these are mitigation steps. Not a complete redesign. Which means Melbourne becomes a live stress test under race conditions. And here is where the formation lap becomes critical. The formation lap is the first full system cycle under real track load. Engine temperature rises. Electrical deployment spikes. Braking harvest kicks in. Structural load changes corner by corner. If the vibration levels begin to mirror what they saw in Bahrain, engineers will not hesitate. Because the cost of ignoring that signal could be catastrophic. Destroying a battery pack in race 1 is not just a retirement. It is a strategic blow to the entire season. And that is why the possibility of retiring before the lights even go out is not dramatic exaggeration. It is controlled preservation. Australia is just days away. Global spotlight. Massive expectation. Newey's name attached to the project. Alonso ready to attack. But underneath that surface is a technical tension that could decide everything in a single lap. And that leads to the next question. If the car does make it through the formation lap, what version of Aston Martin are we actually seeing? Because what they show in Melbourne may not be their true performance at all. Now this is where the story becomes even more complex. Because even if Aston Martin makes it through the formation lap, even if the car starts the race, what you are watching may not be the real car. It may be a restricted version. A controlled version. A version deliberately held back to avoid triggering the same destructive vibration window seen in testing. Engine maps can be softened. Rotational ranges can be avoided. Electrical deployment can be reduced. Energy recovery can be limited. All of that protects the hardware. But all of that also costs lap time. So if you see Alonso struggling on straights in Melbourne, if the car lacks top speed compared to Ferrari or Red Bull, that might not be pure performance deficit. It could be intentional limitation. A survival setting. And here's where the tension deepens. Albert Park is no longer a low-stress circuit. It has long acceleration zones, heavy braking areas, and sustained load through medium-speed corners. That combination stresses both the internal combustion engine and the electrical system, which means every lap becomes a balancing act. Push too hard, and vibration amplitude increases. Harvest too aggressively, and battery load spikes. Deploy too much torque, and structural stress compounds. So even if they race, they may not be racing freely. They may be managing every corner. Now imagine being Fernando Alonso in that situation. You are a two-time world champion. You feel the car through the steering wheel, through the seat, through throttle feedback. If there is abnormal oscillation, you will sense it instantly. And if you sense it, you begin driving differently. You short shift. You modulate throttle earlier. You avoid aggressive curb strikes. You adapt. And those subtle adaptations can cost tenths per lap. Tenths become seconds over a stint. Seconds become positions. So the outside world might interpret it as lack of pace. But inside the cockpit, it might be mechanical preservation. And that leads to a much bigger question. If Aston Martin finishes the race safely but far from the front, what does that mean? It means they bought time. Time to analyze real race data. Time to validate whether the vibration countermeasures actually held under sustained load. Time to continue developing the deeper fix already rumored to be in progress. Because let's be clear, if the architecture between engine and chassis truly has a fundamental resonance issue, it cannot be solved overnight. It requires rethinking stiffness distribution, mounting geometry, possibly even packaging compromises. That is not a weekend adjustment. That is structural engineering. So Melbourne becomes less about results and more about validation. Validation of survival settings. Validation of data correlation. Validation that the platform will not implode under pressure. And here is the uncomfortable truth. If the car looks slow but finishes, that may actually be considered a success internally. Because the alternative is catastrophic failure. And catastrophic failure in race 1 changes everything. Media narrative shifts. Sponsor confidence wavers. Internal pressure multiplies. Engineering focus fragments. So the formation lap remains the first gate. But the entire race becomes the second gate. And both gates are about one word. Stability. In just a few days, under the Australian sun, we are going to find out whether Aston Martin's new era begins with controlled patience, or whether the cracks we saw in testing widen under real race conditions. And if those cracks appear, the decision may not be about winning. It may simply be about surviving long enough to fight later in the season. Now let's push this to its logical conclusion. Because if Melbourne is about stability, then what happens immediately after becomes even more important. If Aston Martin survives the race, even at reduced performance, the engineers go back to the factory with something they did not have in Bahrain. Full race distance data. 300 kilometers of real vibration mapping. Real thermal cycles. Real structural load behavior under competitive conditions. That data is gold. Because simulation can predict resonance. Wind tunnel can predict airflow. But only race distance can reveal whether a vibration issue stabilizes or escalates over time. And here is the deeper strategic layer. If the team retires on the formation lap, they protect hardware but lose long-run validation. If they finish the race conservatively, they gather validation but expose performance weakness. If they push for pace and suffer a failure, they lose both credibility and components. 3 paths. Only one protects both data and allocation. Now consider the regulatory environment. Power unit elements are limited per season. Battery units are limited. Internal combustion components are limited. Every early failure reduces flexibility later in the calendar. And later races are often where development gains matter most. Because if Honda is already preparing a deeper evolution package, possibly a revised specification once performance deficit thresholds are measured, they need a stable baseline first. You cannot upgrade chaos. You upgrade stability. And that is why Australia is not a performance target. It is a control test. But let's examine the psychological impact inside the team. If the car struggles visibly, if it runs with muted engine notes and reduced deployment, rival engineers will notice. Competitors analyze speed traps. They compare energy deployment curves. They listen. And once rivals sense vulnerability, pressure increases. Because Formula One is not just engineering. It is momentum. If momentum turns negative early, decision-making becomes reactive instead of proactive. That is dangerous. So Aston Martin must walk a razor-thin line. Protect components. Avoid public breakdown. Maintain internal confidence. Signal long-term intent. All within one weekend. And it all begins with that quiet formation lap. One slow roll around Albert Park. One cycle of energy harvest and deployment. One opportunity for the vibration traces to either remain calm or spike into danger. If they spike, the decision may look dramatic to the world, but internally, it will have been predefined. Threshold crossed. Protocol executed. Hardware preserved. And if they hold steady, even barely, that single lap becomes the first proof that the platform can survive. Not dominate. Survive. Because sometimes, in a new technical era, survival is step one. Then performance follows. The real question is not whether Aston Martin will be fast in Australia. The real question is whether their foundation is stable enough to build on. And in just a few days, when the engines fire up in Melbourne, we are going to find out whether this crisis was a temporary scare, or the first warning sign of something much deeper beneath the surface.